So people voted for change when Labour were voted into office, even though they got less than 34% of the overall vote. And 15 months later, can anybody say with hand on heart that their lives are any way significantly better in any way? If you're an employer, you're screwed at the moment because you're paying thousands extra in national insurance for employees every year. I listened to Rachel Reeves' speech at the Labour Party conference earlier today, and it was like getting a tooth pulled. And then the usual suspects were wheeled out saying how positive her speech was. And then when the reporters asked, well, are there going to be tax rises again in the November budget? Guys were saying, well, the OBR report is out on Friday, so we can't confirm or deny that there's going to be tax rises. Everyone knows there's going to be tax rises again in November. And I suspect they're going to have to break yet another manifesto promise, which is to either go after VAT or go after income tax. It's as simple as that. Now, me personally, and I don't know how anyone else feels about this, but me personally, I wouldn't have an issue paying an extra penny in income tax if I knew that that money was going to the right place. But it's not. It's the level of waste that's throughout government is just astronomical. I mean, our overseas aid is costing nearly 14 billion a year at the moment. I mean, you send overseas aid when you have your own house in order. Charity begins at home, let's say, and you do, and that's when you concentrate on overseas aid. Things like government departments are so bloated that the civil service is now bigger than it's ever been. And it doesn't need to be that big, but it is. Local services don't work, and they haven't worked for a very long time. My council tax went up again in January, in April of this year. And we were told before the election, not a penny more on council tax. Read my lips, not a penny more on council tax, which was just lies. There was, yes, they didn't raise taxes on employees, but they raised it on the very people that are employing those employees, which makes it harder harder and more expensive to bring somebody on in the first place. So, it stunned me actually when, because the party conference as well is a very carefully stage managed kind of event as well. Of course it is, because they don't want kind of any dissent at a party conference type thing. But, I was just really interested to see the vox pops that were going on with Sky News and BBC and kind of the other mainstream media organisations, where they were asking people, how do you think Labour are doing? And the inevitable answer, they're doing a great job. What planet are these people on, Keir Starmer is officially the most unpopular Prime Minister ever. Worse than Thatcher was at the height of the poll tax riots here in the 80s. Which I remember being around in London. And it's just, they're just completely deluded, these people. It's almost as if they've had a mass lobotomy. It's anyway. So there's that. Come November, I think there's three main things are going to happen. One is that they're going to completely reassess council tax and how that's paid. The rumour is that if you've got a house worth more than £500,000, you'll pay a property tax on that. And if you think about it, it sounds like a lot of money, £500,000, but in the overall scheme of things, people, that are in houses like that probably would have been in those houses for a very, very long time. And as you know, the price of property has just skyrocketed. I mean, it's an interesting stat is that, anything inside the M25 area of London, for example, the average price is about 525,000 now. Now, it's significantly more than that in a lot of areas of London. But even outside of London, you know, you go to the West Country here in Bristol, for example, it's officially the second most expensive city to live in the UK now, property wise and rental wise. So it's going from bad to worse. And I think, in my opinion, and I've been right on this a few times, you know, with previous governments. In my opinion, I think Keir Starmer is on his way out. He just doesn't know it yet. An interesting poll was conducted by Sky, where 2 in 3 people that were polled at the party conference itself anonymously said that Keir Starmer is not the right person for the job, and that Reeves should resign as well, because she's hopeless. I mean, her speech delivery this morning was absolutely wooden. You know, it was obviously on a teleprompter. She'd been practicing it, but she still sounded as wooden as the spoon in the drawer inside in the kitchen at the moment. So I don't think, you know, and again, this is a purely personal thing, all right? I don't think that the leadership that you see there at the moment is going to be around in 3 to 4 months' time. I think the big one for Starmer in particular is going to be the May local elections next year. I don't even see him lasting that long, but even if he does, the results of those local elections are going to be absolutely catastrophic for the Labour Party. Now, some will say, well, every local election is like that when somebody gets kind of near or midterm through a parliament, but these are going to be absolutely catastrophic. Reform are on track that if you know, a general election was called today, they would win a resounding majority, which is extraordinary, considering, you know, that only a few years ago Reform were classed as kind of a fringe party type thing. But they've obviously tapped in to something that people care about. Now, whether you view that as racist or not, it doesn't matter. The fact is that people do view immigration as an issue. They view the fact that people are arriving here by the thousand, literally by the thousands, every week. There's very little housing stock here in the UK. Rents are through the roof type thing. If you're a young person trying to buy a house in this country at the moment, you haven't a hope. I'm lucky. I'm 55 years old. I've been with Deborah for a long time. We were lucky enough to be able to buy a house a long time ago. And when we sold that original house, we were lucky enough to buy the house that we're in at the moment. But if we were starting out now, we wouldn't have had a hope. We'd still be renting and probably spending an extraordinary amount on rent type thing. I have friends at the moment that are literally living from paycheck to paycheck because of the amount of rent that they're paying on property. And apologies if I sound bunged up, by the way. I've got a terrible cold at the moment. But there you go. So what happens next? Well, the party conference is going to be a disaster for them, because it's it's the party faithful go to the conferences. You know, they're very carefully selected on who goes to these party conferences. So you're not getting a real indication from the general public on how Labour are actually doing at the moment. Our own local MP here, he's a Labour MP. He's a perfectly nice guy, but he hasn't a hope of getting re-elected. Not a hope, because, you know, and I personally quite like the guy. I think he's good for the local area, but he can't do anything in isolation. You know, he can highlight this stuff in Parliament, but he can't do things by himself type thing. He has to have the kind of the rest of the party behind him type thing. And I suppose that's the same with any MP, really, isn't it? But, you know, the immigration side of things, you know, I personally, you know, as an Irish guy living in the UK who's been here for 35 years type thing, when I came here because I had a job to come to type thing. I've never claimed any kind of benefits in any way. I've paid into the system. I'll probably retire in the UK, albeit kind of flip back and forward to Ireland when I can. In fact, I'm heading there on Saturday. But, you know, I've paid into the system type thing. And I know there's a lot of talk about them now changing the system so anybody with indefinite leave to remain, for example, won't be able to claim benefits for up to 10 years. But that it was always the case with anybody that had indefinite leave to remain, that they had, you know, prior to getting that, they had no recourse to public funds stamped on their passports. Yeah, which means they couldn't claim anything anyway. So this is nothing new type thing. They're making it out that it's something new. Then you got this new digital ID thing, which has just been an absolute disaster from start to finish. My own opinion is it's not going to happen because, there's nearly 3 million people have signed a petition saying that they're not going to, that they don't want it. And that's 3 million voters. That's the way, the Labour Party should be thinking about it at the moment, because every vote is going to count. I think that the next general election, whenever that's going to be called, is going to be an absolute game changer as well in relation to turnout. Because people that haven't voted before, especially younger people, for example, and the older people as well. Does anybody really think that a pensioner is going to vote for a Labour government again after what they did with the winter fuel allowance? Now, albeit they had to turn back on that because of the public outcry type thing. Does anybody think that an employer is going to vote for a Labour government next time around? So all of these things, seem to be kind of going over the head of the people in charge of Labour at the moment, because they're just not listening. They haven't listened since day one. If you had said, and going back to this winter fuel allowance thing, if you had said that the first major policy announcement of a Labour government would be to get rid of the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, you would have been laughed out of the room. Type thing. If you had said that they were going to raise national insurance for employers, the very people that are keeping the economy going, again, you would have been laughed out of the room. But Rachel Reeves' hands were tied at the time, because she basically said, I'm not going to raise taxes on employees, type thing. But she did in a way, because she's kept the tax-free allowance now up until 2028, which means that people are going to be dragged into higher tax bands anyway, whether they like it or not. So they're going to end up paying more tax. So she's just, yes, she didn't lie, but she didn't tell the truth either. And people are seeing through this now, and they've just had enough of it. So what happens next? Well, excuse me. What happens next is we carry on. We see how it goes. I think the start of the new year, 2026, is going to be an absolute game changer in this country, because the local elections, everyone knows that Reform are going to win in a lot of those local elections. And if that's an indication of how it will go in a general election, this country is screwed. It really is. Now, I'm no fan of Reform. I've never been a fan of Reform, but nobody can say that they're not that they're not absolutely brilliant at being PR masters, as in public relations masters type thing. They're on the news every day. They're even being touted by the Home Secretary at her speech at the Labour Party conference. So this is a publicity guy's wet dream type thing. So I think next year we'll probably see a different PM, because I think Starmer is toast. He just doesn't know it yet. And I think there's probably going to be some sort of a reshuffle again before too long. I listened to Darren Jones this morning saying, I can't, I'm not saying there's going to be tax raises, but I don't know if there's going to be tax raises, when everyone knows there's going to be tax raises type thing in November. Now, will that directly affect workers? It probably will in one way, because if they go after VAT, everything is going to get a couple of percent more expensive. Inflation is still running at nearly 4%. So unless you're getting at least 4% pay rise every year, you are worse off every year. When I celebrate is when we have deflation, when it goes to minus numbers type thing. So unless you're getting a 4% pay rise every year, which you're probably not, you're worse off every year at the moment. And even if it goes down to 2%, which is the Bank of England's kind of rate of inflation that they want to have, unless you're getting at least a 2% pay rise every year, which you're probably not, because all of these companies now have to pay out extra in national insurance and stuff, so they will give you the absolute bare amount, like maybe 1.5% type thing. You're worse off every year. And then with the inevitable tax rises that come for business, that will probably come in for businesses as well, be that corporate tax or whatever else, it further puts people off hiring people because it becomes unaffordable to do it. Because at the end of the day, if you're a big corporation, you'll find ways around it, because none of the big corporations pay the proper rate of tax. They never have, they never will, because they've got an army of lawyers that can, that can offshore stuff and do whatever. But if you're a small business, which is the lifeblood of the UK economy, because, you've got local areas feed into these businesses and these businesses feed into the local areas type thing, they're going to be absolutely trounced. If you've got 10, 15 people employed in your local business type thing and your bills go up by 10 grand a month, that's £120,000 a year that you're paying out extra in tax. So there you go. But this all seems lost on the powers that be. This black hole that Reeves keeps going on about, the original black hole, which was 19 billion, is now turned into a 50 billion pound black hole. Not helped, of course, by paying massive wage increases to train drivers and doctors and nurses and stuff like that. And again, I have no issue, by the way, with anybody earning a decent wage. Of course not. But, giving them 25, 26%, come on. Give me a break. But there you go. Excuse me again. See, I haven't got COVID, I promise. I tested myself this morning just to be on the safe side. It's just a bloody cold that I can't get rid of. That's why I'm wrapped up like a mummy at the moment. So there we go. And again, this digital ID thing. What are they thinking? How is it going to stop the black economy? It's not. Is it suddenly going to shut down all the Turkish barbershops and suddenly shut down all the car washes that you see on the side of the road? All of that type of thing. Illegal working's been around for decades. It's not going to stop just because of it, Do people really think that somebody that's working here illegally is worried about digital IDs? Whenever you apply for a job, you're supposedly give your passport or your driving license as a form of ID or whatever it is, to make sure that you're working there legally, and the fines can be huge. But, people that employ people illegally don't give a shit about that. They never have, they never will. So how is a digital ID going to solve that? Some will say it's about control of the population and, making sure that they're all staying in line. I don't believe that, but, I can understand why people would go down that route. But there you go. Anyway, what can you do? Such is life, eh? 3 months before Christmas, and we're still worried about how we're going to pay for Christmas. But that's a completely separate thing. Anyway, I hope you're all having a nice day. Let me know what you think in the comments. It's fun and games to come, I think. See you later.